Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frata Eleftheria, and tonight's video is going to be about a specific type of meditation which is contained within the curriculum of the Argenteum Astrum order. And you know, when you think of meditation, you might think of like Vipassana meditation or meditation in Raja Yoga, these kinds of more traditional forms of meditation, even something modern like transcendental meditation, where it's all about sort of stilling the mind and going into pure consciousness in some way. But the meditation that I'm talking about is the meditation in the AA book of Liber Turris. And it is a meditation which is about the destruction of thoughts. So a bit more of a kind of a objective behind the meditation, rather than just being and being in consciousness. And it's kind of, you know, not exactly a visualization type of meditation, but there is some kind of almost like mental exercises involved along with the meditation to try and get the desired result. As the description suggests, Liber Turris is a meditation which is all about focusing the will in order to vaporize thoughts. Liber Turris, the exercise in Liber Turris, in the kind of tasks of the AA, is located on the path of pay between Hod and Netzach. So sort of in those lower grades of the AA. And the path of pay, of course, corresponds to the Tower card in the tarot trumps, the tower being blasted and destroyed by the lightning bolt from above. And the tower in this instance represents the false tower of thought and delusion. You might even say it's the mind's very own ivory tower. So what I'm doing tonight is I'm going to read some excerpts from my magical diaries, which I've sort of collated together. And they are kind of like my accounts of when I made a number of attempts at the exercise in Liber Turris and the results that I got by doing that. And I want to offer my insights into what I think the secret is to performing the Liber Turris meditation well, the meditation for the destruction of thoughts. Enjoy. I decided to explore the meditation for the destruction of thoughts found in Liber Turris. I conducted the exercise downstairs on the red couch with no headphones. The exercise lasted for 12 minutes. I began by undertaking the first point of the practice, by identifying the point at which thoughts well up in my mind. I found this point to be located deep within my mind, perhaps somewhere in the center of my mind. I then undertook the second point of the practice. I formulated a will of annihilation, as per the book's instructions. I then entered the exercise's phase of annihilating fully fledged thoughts at the point of their recognition by my awareness. This is the third point of the practice. I found the annihilation of thoughts that were already fully formed relatively easy. Using the will of annihilation that I formulated and was able to focus on them, like a laser beam. My destruction of the thoughts was accompanied by an intense feeling in my brain, like an electric shock going through my brain. I also felt as though the mental act of annihilation was very energy intensive, and I found myself getting tired quite quickly as I undertook the practice. I then moved on to the next phase, the fourth point of the practice, which involves destroying thoughts as soon as they begin to arise. This also came relatively easily, but was harder than the previous phase of the exercise. Sometimes I would not stop a thought in time, and it would suddenly fully emerge. I then needed to take the extreme measure of shocking it into non-existence once more. In comparison, the sensation associated with destroying thoughts at their source was much less intense than the sensation of destroying them fully fledged. It was as though the energy expended on destroying any given thought had to be a match for the amount of energy that that thought had already accumulated after having escaped into existence in the mind. It went from being something that was just budding out of the mind to something which grew into a very large and occupying thought. I continued attempting to destroy thoughts at their source for some time. Then I attempted pratyahara to still thought completely. A few thoughts still did try to arise, but I dealt with them summarily. I then proceeded to the fifth point. I increased my sensitivity to become aware of the fluid mental impressions that would arise, which would later develop into thoughts. I found that as soon as I focused on those vague impressions, I caused them to coalesce into fully formed thoughts even more rapidly. I once again found myself battling the arising of thought. When I felt ready, I again tried to destroy my mental impressions. Instead of fixing the impression as a thought by becoming aware of it, I deliberately stirred up each impression so it was unable to coagulate into a thought. It then became easier to vaporize the impression. But the impressions were unrelenting. As I annihilated more and more of them though, and was able to subdue them more and more, I began to achieve a clarity and thoughtlessness I've only ever felt in the very best of my pratyahara practices. It made me realize just how much mental pollution is always swirling around in the consciousness, even during meditation. The final task before me in the exercise, the sixth point, is to observe and identify or unmask the so-called Mayan or Mara that stands behind the arising of impressions, whatever that may be. I attempted the Liber Turris meditation again, in the same conditions as the last attempt. This time, the exercise went for 20 minutes. I made my will of annihilation habitual this time. However, this automatic response wore off after a time. After continuing on with the practice a bit more, I soon decided that the volume of my mind was sufficiently turned down for me to discover what Mayan or Mara really was. I followed the arising of thoughts and impressions back to their source. There I discovered an involuntary process in the brain, a physical reaction whereby the energy from stimuli would automatically be passed on into the brain, leading to brain activity. And once the neural activity had been released into the larger network of information stores in the brain, it had free rein to snowball and develop into a montage of thought. Really, this process that I was able to pinpoint is the beginning of our perception of the phenomenal world as distinct from the noumenal world. It is our perception of the world of delusion, the world of Mara or Maya. By this stage of the practice, I became aware that my inner investigation was itself becoming a train of thought. However, I allowed it for a time to gain additional insight into the practice. As I let thought run, I realized the mind is like a closed circuit, feeding back energy in the form of thought back into itself, with this phenomena of Maya serving as the power generator. I was in fact aggravating my mental activity and turning the turbine faster the more that I thought. But I continued to indulge thought in order to investigate if there was a new method of stopping Mara. It was then that I had another thought, which was really an insight. The key to stopping the generator of Maya, that generates thought was first to still the mind as far as possible, then to observe every thought that arose, then to formulate the will of annihilation in the form of not just the pure lightning bolt of will, but the perfectly balanced counterforce, both quantitative and qualitative, of a particular thought. Then the goal was to unleash the counterforce so that every thought was balanced by its exact opposite. This should have occurred to me sooner. Indeed, the very definition of the word annihilation is the mutual destruction of opposites to arrive at zero. I employed this new technique, and to great effect. There were a couple of brief moments in the practice where for several seconds mental activity stopped completely. Beyond this point, I could not maintain the exercise for any longer due to tiredness, but I consider that I have gained a degree of success in the practice. As part of Liber Turris, Crowley gives 3 poems. He hints that understanding the meanings of the poems will give some hint as to how to judge success in the practice of the meditation for the destruction of thoughts. In the first poem, there is a mild maiden in the center of a stronghold of robbers, all fighting one another. She seems to represent the root of consciousness, while the robbers represent the cacophony of thoughts occupying the mind. A thunderbolt hits the stronghold, and the punchline of the poem is that the thunderbolt, in other words, the process for destroying the different phases of thought, this thunderbolt which destroys the robbers also transforms the mild maiden into a rejoicing wife. This would seem to vindicate my view that the final annihilation of Maya is achieved through balance. The allegory bears similarities to the Kabbalistic doctrine of the daughter being exalted to the throne of the queen by marrying the son of the king. I also observe that she is raised from Malkut to Bina, and so, since she must necessarily pass through the abyss to do this, the worldly impressions must go through an annihilation. Every thought must be put against its opposite until there is nothing left under the sun. This process also implies the sacred marriage of opposites and therefore the balance. As a maiden, she pines after her love. She is thus moved by desire, and the equilibrium is disturbed. Once she has been reconciled with her opposite, she is satisfied, still, in a state of balance. So the root of consciousness can only be stopped in its tracks by achieving a state of balance. The second allegory discusses a well before the great throne, which is choked up with rubbish from the ages. Once the rubbish is purged, it flows as a pure fountain. This can only be achieved once the throne is no longer occupied by the tyrant and is instead occupied by he who sits on the throne by right. The rubbish of the ages is an obvious metaphor for thoughts and impressions, which I likewise viewed as mental pollution in my initial practice of the Liber Turris meditation. The pure flowing fountain represents pure consciousness uninhibited by thought, similar to the flow state of Zen. The one who sits on the throne by right can only be Adonai, who is really the innermost divine self, and who is awakened in knowledge and conversation through the balancing of opposites. The one who opposes Adonai is called tyrant, which again suggests an unbalanced force of will, perhaps even the force of ego. Quote, "Remember that unbalanced force is evil, that unbalanced severity is but cruelty and oppression, but that also unbalanced mercy is but weakness, which would allow and abet evil." Liber 30, verse 12. Thus, the solution for defeating Maya is the same as in the previous allegory. But I would add that the second allegory introduces a further key, that the purified will is singular and focused, while the corrupted will is divided into, quote, "wits and wills," end quote. The third poem contains a number of references to the alchemical process of combining opposites and of balancing the three gunas. Perhaps the wheel that I saw in one vision that I had during this exercise was in fact the wheel of fortune, containing the three alchemical types of matter, sulfur, mercury and salt, in the form of Hermanubis, Typhon and the Sphinx. The solution to this allegory again lies in the balance, this time in the balancing of the qualities that we find around the wheel. In light of understanding these three allegories, I believe I have grasped the true goal of the Liber Turris meditation. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please leave a like on the video, subscribe to my channel to support my work, leave any comments you have down below, and if you want to support me further, hit join or thanks down below. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.